Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the death toll from battles being fought in Khartoum streets between the army and the RSF paramilitary force has cost at least 180 Sudanese civilians their lives over 3 days of urban warfare. Also, the explosion into violence shows no signs of abating and sparks fears of regional spillover. Regional allies of Sudan and the United Nations make diplomatic moves to try and stem the clashes with, for now, little impact. And we turn to Nigeria, where airport strikes in Abuja and Lagos take off, leaving passengers grounded in the country's key cities. Workers are protesting poor pay and conditions. But first, the UN has said that more than 180 people have been killed in Sudan as the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces continue to battle in the capital and elsewhere in the country. People living in Khartoum hid in their homes for a third day on Monday as rival forces led by the country's top 2 generals used heavy weaponry and even aircraft in densely populated areas. Commanders of the armed forces, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and head of the RSF, General Mohamed Daglo, known as Hemeti, have demanded the others surrender, and the fighting has continued to intensify. Jenny Shin tells us more.
Airstrikes and artillery fire rock Sudan's embattled capital, Khartoum, as the power struggle continues between the National Army and the RSF paramilitary group for a third day. RSF Chief Mohamed Hamdan Daglo took to Twitter to call for an international intervention.
The international community must take action now and intervene against the crimes of Sudanese General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, a radical Islamist who's bombing civilians from the air. His army is waging a brutal campaign against innocent people, bombing them with MiGs.
The country's army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, meanwhile, has ordered the dissolution of the RSF. And while vowing to defeat the group, he says he remains open to negotiations.
Every war ends at the negotiation table, even if the opponent is defeated.
The violent clashes between the two factions have drawn international condemnation and demands for an immediate ceasefire.
The message of the EU is extremely clear, which is cessation of hostilities, de-escalation of the current situation, urging for the respect of the international humanitarian law and the protection of citizens, of civilians. And of course, we call on external actors to refrain from interfering.
General al-Burhan and General Daglo were former allies who joined forces to orchestrate a coup in 2021 and seize power, until plans to integrate the paramilitary group into the army led to soured relations between the two leaders. The coup derailed a fragile transition to civilian rule. Pro-democracy activists have accused both generals of a long history of human rights abuses.
While both sides have claimed gains, neither side seems keen on negotiating. Power and water have been cut off in parts of Khartoum, and the EU ambassador to Sudan was reportedly assaulted at his home on Monday. Calls for negotiation, mediation and talks between the warring sides have come from Sudan's neighbours and from the UN and elsewhere to, so far, little avail. Bastien Renouy tells us more.
Both General Burhan, the head of the army, and General Hemeti, the commander of the rapid support forces, are leading troops of about 100,000 men. They are well equipped, they have money, so there is no reason to believe that they will stop fighting anytime soon because of a lack of men or because of a lack of money. And that's probably what urged the international community to act so quickly. Many countries, such as France, offered to organize a mediation between the two men. Many countries in the region as well. Kenya's president, South Sudan president, Djibouti's president offered to visit Khartoum. Many international organizations, such as the UN and the Arab League, organized meetings to try to find a solution. Listen to the Moroccan permanent representative to the Arab League.
We called on Arab countries' diplomatic missions in Khartoum to maintain normal operations and closely follow the situation. They're currently helping the Sudanese authorities and parties to take appropriate measures and seek solutions to the crisis so as to avoid escalation and to let Sudan return to the path that the Sudanese people expect.
According to the statements from the army and from the rapid support forces, there are very little chances that these mediation efforts will work during the next days, because the army said that they will not negotiate with Hemeti before the dissolution of the rapid support forces, and there is very little chance that Hemeti will agree to do so. So my contacts in Khartoum are worried that the only evolution that could occur during the next days is an escalation of the clashes.
Bastien Renouy, our regional correspondent there for us. Now, earlier, Enas Mouzamel, a human rights activist in Khartoum, told us more about the conditions on the ground.
People live in a bad and deteriorating humanitarian situation. Access to food and water has become really difficult. There is also a shortage of fuel and acute shortage of electricity supply and water. And the most horrible one, that the access to hospitals has become almost impossible. People rely on doctors over phone, and we don't know how long this situation will continue, and the extent of the loss of life, and also this damage in infrastructure. I mean, Khartoum airport, the streets, hospitals, and if you can hear now, they start again shelling. And we are just sitting inside. We are not even allowed to sit by the windows or open spaces, because most of the people who were killed during this war, since the day before yesterday, were killed by the random shooting. It's the month of Ramadan, so we don't eat a lot during the day. But of course, we are worried. Very worried about what will happen in the coming 2, 3, 4 days when especially the water. I mean, we are in Khartoum is one of the hottest cities in the world in Sudan. I'm talking to you right now, and the temperature is 42. So imagine, and no electricity, and it's really horrible in the month of Ramadan. So I cannot go more than just few, 50 meters or something in the shop in the corner of the street. That's what we can do, or the bakery. And today they are closed.
In other news, the head of Tunisia's main opposition party, Ennahda, has been arrested. Police reportedly raided the home of Rachid Ghannouchi on Monday before taking him in for questioning. The 81-year-old is the latest of several leading opposition figures who've been detained in Tunisia this year. The Islamist Ennahda party had been the biggest in parliament until that was shut down by President Kais Saied in a power grab in 2021. Now, in Nigeria, thousands of travellers have been stranded on Monday as airport workers downed tools. Several flights were cancelled as employees across seven unions began a 2-day strike in Abuja and Lagos over working pay and conditions. Laura Berstecker has more.
Slowing traffic and threatening to delay flights, Nigerian airport workers kicked off a 2-day strike over pay and working conditions outside the Lagos domestic terminal.
We have decided that it is time for us to release aviation workers from the bondage of this imperialist aviation management that we have been having for years.
The strike was announced last week by unions representing pilots, engineers, and control tower operators. It reflects the industry's growing dissatisfaction with low salaries and the so-called conditions of service, which haven't been updated in 7 years. Striking workers called on the government to impose a minimum wage system for airport personnel and criticized plans to demolish the offices of several aviation agencies to expand the Lagos airport. Others also claimed they were still owed unpaid wages. Police and the army watched from a distance as protesters blocked the main roads leading to the terminal, forcing disgruntled travelers to finish their journey on foot.
My husband have to drop me on the bridge. I have to be trekking down to the airport just to find this kind of labor unrest somehow. So I'm still wondering whether we could fly today or not.
The protests are likely to pile pressure on Nigeria's troubled aviation sector, which is already grappling with fuel shortages and plummeting revenue from ticket sales. Labor unions have threatened to strike indefinitely later this month if their demands aren't addressed.
The American health giant Johnson & Johnson recently announced that it will be settling thousands of lawsuits with a payout of $0.9 billion. More than 60,000 claimants in the US, most of whom are women, are suing the company, saying that its talc baby powder causes cancer. In South Africa, the product is still on sale in many supermarkets. Our correspondents tell us more.
Johnson & Johnson's original baby powder has been used around the world for over 100 years. Sales in the US were ended in 2020 over thousands of consumer safety lawsuits. But in South Africa, it is readily available and still very popular.
I love the effect of the smell, and I use the original one.
I actually have the original and the nighttime baby powder, so I use it when I'm changing a bum when she comes out of the bath.
I use it for the baby's clothes and to let him smell good.
More than 60,000 people in the US claim the product was contaminated and caused them to develop cancer. Johnson & Johnson denies this, and the controversy still is not well known in South Africa. This professor has been trying for over 10 years to get the baby powder banned. He says that the talc contains high levels of carcinogenic asbestos. Ovarian cancers have been on the rise in South Africa.
There is more than sufficient scientific evidence that it causes cancer. Not a possible or a maybe, it's definitely it. Many of the claims were because the mothers used talc powder, Johnson & Johnson talc powder, on the infant female babies. And that's where their cancer eventually came from, because it can take years for that cancer to eventually establish.
J&J says that its talc-based powder will be on sale in South Africa until supply runs out. It will then be replaced by a cornstarch-based alternative.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. See you again. Take care.